I'm Beatrice Thorne, 82, a woman, and my family only invited me to my own birthday party so they could brag about my sister's success. It sounds like a line from a rather bitter play, doesn't it? I wish it were. For 82 years, I have tried to be a woman of grace. I have weathered loss, celebrated joys with a quiet heart, and believed, perhaps naively, that a life lived with simple decency was a life of value. I raised a son, buried a husband, tended my garden, and kept a home that was a sanctuary of peace and order. But peace and order, I have learned, are not commodities that my own family trades in. Their currency is status and their god is appearance. I, it seems, was merely a line item in their budget of obligations, one they finally found a way to merge with a more profitable account: my sister Margaret. Margaret Sterling. Even her name sounds like money, doesn't it? She is 2 years my junior, a fact she has somehow spun to seem like a decade. While I was marrying my steady, kind-hearted Frank, a high school history teacher, Margaret was marrying a man who ran a successful import-export business. While I was learning to stretch a dollar to make sure our son Robert had new shoes for school, Margaret was flying to Paris for new shoes of her own. Our lives were two rivers that began at the same spring but diverged almost immediately, one meandering quietly through peaceful, predictable countryside, the other carving a loud, dramatic path through exotic canyons. From our earliest days, Margaret had a magnetism that I lacked. She was the sun and I was the pale moon that could only be seen when she was absent. I remember one summer when I was 10, I spent the entire season nurturing a single tomato plant for the county fair. It was my secret project. I watered it, sang to it, and protected it from every pest. The tomatoes were magnificent, a deep, perfect red. On the day of the fair, I went to fetch my basket, only to find Margaret in the yard, posing for our father's camera beside my plant, a blue ribbon already pinned to its stake. She told everyone it was hers. When I cried, my mother simply sighed and said, "B, don't make a fuss. Let your sister have her moment. You're the elder, you should be more mature." That was the first time I learned that my work could be co-opted for her glory, and that my feelings were an inconvenience. The pattern repeated itself in larger, more wounding ways throughout our lives. When Frank proposed to me, he did it on a park bench with a simple, delicate gold ring that we had picked out together. It was the happiest moment of my life. A week later, at our engagement party, Margaret announced that her boyfriend, the one with the business, had proposed to her on a trip to Italy. She held out her hand, and on it sat a diamond so large it looked like a shard of ice. The rest of the evening, my own engagement was forgotten. All anyone could talk about was Margaret's diamond, Margaret's Italian romance, Margaret's glamorous future. She didn't just steal the spotlight, she extinguished it, leaving me in the shadows, smiling politely while my heart felt like a stone. Frank squeezed my hand under the table, his warmth the only thing that kept me from crumbling. "I love you, B," he whispered. "That's all that matters." And for 45 years it was. After Frank passed away, my world became smaller, quieter. My son Robert was grown with a family of his own. He married Susan, a woman who assesses everyone by the brand of their handbag. They lived in a large, sterile house in a gated community, the kind of place where the silence is more unnerving than peaceful. My relationship with Robert had always been formal. He loved me, I suppose, in the way one loves a landmark from their childhood. He was dutiful. He called on Sundays. He sent flowers on Mother's Day. But the warmth, the easy affection I'd shared with Frank was absent. Robert was his Aunt Margaret's nephew more than he was my son. He admired her wealth, her audacity, her social standing. He saw my modest life not as dignified but as a failure of ambition. He'd often say things like, "Mom, you should have let Frank invest in the market more. Look at Aunt Margaret. She and Uncle Thomas really knew how to make money work for them." He never understood that for Frank and me, money was for living, not for keeping score. My world consisted of my garden, my books, my weekly bridge club with ladies who understood the quiet rhythms of our age, and my granddaughter, Chloe. Chloe was Robert's youngest, a child of his late-in-life second marriage, and she was nothing like her father or his first wife, Susan. She was an artist, a gentle soul with an old spirit, much like my Frank. She saw the world in colors and emotions, not price tags. She would visit me not out of duty, but because she genuinely enjoyed my company. We'd sit in my garden for hours, sketching flowers and talking about everything and nothing. He was the one true, uncomplicated joy in my life, a balm on the old, faded scars left by a lifetime of comparison. It was Chloe who kept me from disappearing entirely into the pale background of the family portrait. But even her love couldn't prepare me for the masterclass in humiliation my family had planned for my 82nd birthday. The call came on a Tuesday. It was Robert. His calls were usually reserved for Sunday afternoons, a perfunctory 10-minute check-in. A weekday call was an anomaly. "Mom, you sitting down?" he began, his voice laced with a false, manufactured excitement that immediately put me on edge. "I'm always sitting down, Robert. At my age, it's my primary mode of transportation," I replied, trying for a bit of levity. He chuckled, a short, barking sound. "Right, well, listen, Susan and I have been talking. Your birthday is coming up, the big 8-2. I'm well aware, dear. I've been there for all the preceding 81. Yes, well, we feel we haven't done enough for you lately. We want to throw you a party, a proper one, at our house." I was stunned into silence. A party. Robert and Susan had never hosted anything for me ever. My birthdays were usually marked by a quiet lunch with Chloe, or perhaps the bridge club ladies bringing over a cake. Robert and Susan typically sent a gift certificate to a sensible department store. Their home, a cavernous museum of beige furniture and abstract art that looked angry, was reserved for what Susan called strategic entertaining, business associates or people they wished to impress. I certainly didn't fit into that category. "The party," I finally managed to say. "Oh, Robert, that's not necessary, it's too much trouble." "Nonsense," he insisted, his voice taking on a tone of magnanimous authority. "It's no trouble at all. We want to do this. We'll handle everything. All you have to do is show up and be the guest of honor." The guest of honor. The words felt foreign, exotic. A part of me, the part that had been starved for a crumb of recognition for decades, felt a foolish, hopeful flutter. Maybe he'd finally seen it. Maybe, in his middle age, he was beginning to understand the value of family beyond its strategic advantages. Maybe he wanted to make up for years of casual neglect. "Well," I said, the hope making my voice tremble slightly, "that is very thoughtful of you and Susan. Are you sure?" "Positive, it'll be great, and guess what? We have a surprise for you, a special guest." "Oh, Aunt Margaret is back," he announced, as if revealing the winner of a grand prize. "Her cruise docked in Miami last week. She's flying in just for your party." And there it was. The other shoe dropped, landing squarely on my budding hope and crushing it flat. It was never about me. It was about Margaret. She had just completed a 6-month round-the-world cruise, an extravagance that had been the subject of Robert and Susan's odd conversations for as long as it had been planned. Of course, they wanted to throw a party. It wasn't for my 82nd year of life. It was for her triumphant circumnavigation of the globe. I was just the convenient excuse, the wrapping paper on their gift to her. "How lovely," I said, my voice now perfectly flat. The warmth had vanished. "Isn't it? She was so excited to hear we were doing this for you. She said it was the perfect welcome home," Robert barreled on, completely oblivious to the shift in my tone. "So, it's settled. Saturday the 18th, 4 p.m. Don't be late. And Mom, wear that blue dress, the one Aunt Margaret said brings out your eyes." I hung up the phone, feeling a familiar, hollow ache in my chest. Even my attire had to be curated by Margaret's taste. For the next few days, I existed in a state of weary resignation. I told myself it didn't matter, it was just a party. It was a chance to see Chloe and perhaps some of the other more distant relatives who might attend. I would go, smile politely, and endure. It was a role I had been practicing for a lifetime. Chloe called me, her voice fizzing with genuine excitement. "Grandma, Dad told me about the party. Isn't it wonderful?" "It's a surprise, certainly," I said, trying to match her energy. It's about time they did something special for you. You deserve it. I'm so excited to celebrate you. What are you going to wear?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her that my outfit had already been decreed by a higher power. "I'm still deciding," I lied. The week leading up to the party was a slow, painful march. I took the blue dress to the dry cleaners. It was a perfectly nice dress, a simple silk sheath. Margaret had indeed complimented it once years ago, which in my family's hierarchy was akin to a royal decree. As I looked at myself in the mirror, the dress felt like a costume for a part I no longer wanted to play, the agreeable, invisible older sister. The day of the party, I felt a deep sense of dread. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon, leaves outside my window, a riot of gold and crimson. It felt like the world was putting on a show, and I was being dragged to a command performance against my will. I did my hair, applied a touch of lipstick, and pinned on a small, tasteful brooch Frank had given me for our 30th anniversary. It was my small act of rebellion, a piece of my own history amidst their curated event. As I waited for Chloe to pick me up, Robert had said he was too busy with last-minute preparations to fetch his own mother. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one Frank used to occupy. The house was quiet, filled with the scent of old books and lemon polish. It was my life, simple, unadorned, and entirely my own. For a moment I considered calling the whole thing off, faking a headache, but I knew it would only cause more trouble, more sighs, and accusations of being difficult. So when Chloe's little car beeped outside, I stood up, took a deep breath, and walked out the door to attend the celebration of my own erasure. The moment we turned onto Robert and Susan Street, my heart sank. Cars lined both sides of the immaculate road, expensive, gleaming vehicles that shone with the self-satisfied polish of their owners. This was no small family gathering. This was an event. Chloe squeezed my hand. "Wow, Dad really went all out. This is going to be fun." Her innocence was a sharp, painful contrast to the cold dread solidifying in my stomach. As we walked up the long, paved driveway, the front door was thrown open. Robert stood there, beaming, his arm draped around my sister Margaret. She looked magnificent, of course. She was dressed in a vibrant turquoise kaftan, dripping with chunky ethnic jewelry she no doubt collected on her travels. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her tan was radiant, and she looked at least 15 years younger than her 80 years. I, in my sensible blue dress, felt like a faded photograph standing next to a Technicolor film. "Beatrice, there's the birthday girl," Margaret trilled, her voice carrying across the manicured lawn. She detached herself from Robert and glided towards me, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume. She kissed the air next to my cheeks. "You look sweet. That blue is so dependable." Dependable, not beautiful, not lovely. Dependable. The word landed like a small, dull thud. Robert ushered us inside. The house, usually so sterile, had been transformed, but not for me. The decorations were all travel-themed. Miniature globes served as centerpieces on the tables. Photographs were everywhere, not of me, not of my life or my family, but of Margaret. Margaret on a camel in front of the pyramids. Margaret sipping wine in a Tuscan vineyard. Margaret posing with a ship's captain on a gleaming deck. A massive banner hung over the fireplace. In glittering gold letters, it read, "Congratulations, Margaret, welcome home, Globetrotter." Beneath it, in much smaller, almost apologetic print, it said, "And happy 82nd to be." I felt the blood drain from my face. Chloe, standing beside me, went rigid. Her eyes darted from the banner to my face, her cheerful expression melting into one of dawning horror. "Dad," Chloe's voice was sharp, "what is this?" Robert, who had been busy accepting a slap on the back from one of Margaret's friends, turned. "What's what, sweetie? It's a party. Grab some champagne." "The banner," she said, pointing. "It's Grandma's birthday. Why is Aunt Margaret's name bigger than hers?" Susan materialized at Robert's side, her smile as tight as a drum. "Chloe, don't be dramatic. We're celebrating everyone. It's a joint party. It was just easier that way." A joint party. My 82nd birthday was a side note, an addendum to the main event. I stood there, rooted to the spot as guests swirled around me. They were all Margaret's people, women in expensive silks, men with booming laughs who smelled of cigars and success. A few of them patted my arm condescendingly. "Margaret's sister, aren't you? How lovely to meet you. She talks about you all the time." I wondered what she said. That she had a quiet, dependable sister living in a small house in a less fashionable part of town. I found a seat in a forgotten corner of the living room, a small island in a sea of strangers. Chloe sat with me, her hand resting protectively on my arm, her face a thundercloud of anger. I just wanted to be invisible, to shrink into the plush upholstery and disappear. But the humiliation wasn't over. The main performance was yet to come. After about an hour, Robert tapped a glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. The room quieted. "Friends, family," he began, his chest puffed out with pride. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here today for two very special reasons. First, to welcome home our amazing, inspirational, world-traveling Aunt Margaret." A round of enthusiastic applause erupted. Margaret, standing near the fireplace, gave a regal wave. Robert continued, his gaze fixed on his aunt. "She's shown us all what it means to truly live life to the fullest, to grab it with both hands and see everything this world has to offer. We're so incredibly proud of her adventures and so happy to have her home safe." He paused, then glanced in my direction as if suddenly remembering. "And of course, we're also here to wish my mother, Beatrice, a happy 82nd birthday." A smattering of polite, almost confused applause followed. It was a pathetic little sound compared to the roar for Margaret. "Now," Robert said, raising his glass, "I'd like to propose a toast. But before I do, Susan and I have a little something for our two guests of honor." Susan walked forward holding two gift-wrapped boxes. She handed the smaller one to me. It was light. I opened it. Inside was a generic scented candle and a gift card to a bookstore. "Happy birthday, Mom," Robert said, his eyes already moving on. Then Susan presented the other box, a much larger, more extravagantly wrapped package, to Margaret. "For you, Aunt Margaret," she cooed. "A little something to remember your travels by." Margaret opened it with a flourish. Inside was a state-of-the-art digital photo frame, large and sleek. Robert took a remote from his pocket and clicked a button. The screen flickered to life and a slideshow began. It was hundreds of photos from Margaret's cruise. Margaret in Singapore, Margaret in Rio, Margaret in Venice. The room filled with oohs and ahs. Margaret was beaming. And then Robert began his toast. "To Aunt Margaret," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To a woman who never settled, who built a life of success and glamour not just for herself but as an example for all of us. When Dad died, my mom had her modest life, but it was you, Aunt Margaret, who showed me what was possible. Your generosity, your guidance, you helped fund my first business venture. You helped us with the down payment on this house. You are the bedrock of this family's success. You are the matriarch in spirit, the one who inspires us all to aim higher. So here's to you, Aunt Margaret, welcome home." He didn't toast me, he didn't even mention my name again. In the toast at my own birthday party, I was reduced to a passing reference, a modest life used only as a point of contrast to highlight my sister's glory. The room erupted in cheers. "To Margaret," they all shouted. I sat there, the scented candle in my lap, feeling the blood pound in my ears. Every cell in my body felt cold. It wasn't just an oversight, it was a public declaration, a statement of my worth or lack thereof. I was the before picture, Margaret was the after. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Chloe's voice, low and furious. "That's it, we're leaving." I looked at her. Her young face was a mask of pain and rage on my behalf. She saw it. She understood it completely. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been dormant for 82 years, finally snapped. I nodded. "Yes, dear," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I think it's time to go home." Chloe drove me home in a heavy silence. The cheerful autumn scenery that had seemed so lovely just hours before now looked mocking, its vibrant colors too loud for the gray landscape of my heart. I stared out the window, seeing nothing, the words of Robert's toast replaying in my mind on a relentless loop. The matriarch in spirit, the bedrock of this family's success. My mom had her modest life, but it was you. He had cleaved our family in two, right there in front of everyone, and placed me on the lesser side. He had taken my life, my 45 years of marriage to his father, the home I had created, the love I had poured into raising him, and dismissed it as a quaint, insignificant prelude to the real story which belonged to Margaret. When we arrived at my small, quiet house, Chloe helped me out of the car. She walked me to the door, her arm linked through mine, as if she were afraid I might shatter on the flagstone path. Inside, I sank into my armchair, the one that still held the faint impression of my husband, Frank. The scented candle from Robert and Susan was still in my handbag. I didn't take it out. I felt as if its artificial fragrance would contaminate the genuine, honest air of my home. "Grandma," Chloe said softly, kneeling in front of me, her eyes, so much like Frank's, were filled with a deep, aching sorrow. "I am so sorry. That was monstrous." I couldn't speak. I could only nod, a tight, jerky movement of my head. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my wrinkled cheek. Then another, and another. Soon I was weeping. Not loudly, but with the deep, silent, body-shaking sobs of a grief that has been suppressed for a lifetime. Decades of small slights, of being overlooked, of smiling politely while my heart broke. It all came pouring out in that quiet living room. Chloe didn't say a word. She just wrapped her arms around my shoulders and held me, letting me cry until the wellspring of my sorrow finally ran dry. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. The initial shock curdled into a profound, bone-deep loneliness. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I would walk through my garden, touching the petals of my late-blooming roses, and wonder if I was truly there. I had spent my entire existence in service to a family that saw me as a footnote. What was the point of it all? The pride I'd taken in my simple, well-kept life now felt like a fool's delusion. Robert's words had poisoned it, reframing my dignity as deficiency. I tried to reason with myself. He didn't mean it that way. He got caught up in the moment, but I knew better. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was a revelation of his soul. It was what he truly believed. A week after the party, I gathered the courage to call him. My hand trembled as I dialed his number. "Hi, Mom," he answered, his voice brisk and businesslike. "Everything okay?" I wanted to talk about the party, Robert," I began, my voice small. A heavy sigh came through the receiver. "Mom, it was a great party. Everyone had a wonderful time. Susan knocked herself out planning it." "It was supposed to be my birthday party," I said, the words tasting like ash. "The banner, the toast, it was all for Margaret." "Robert," I felt so humiliated. His response was cold, defensive. "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. We were celebrating both of you. It's not a competition. Aunt Margaret has just been on this incredible trip. People wanted to hear about it. You can't expect everyone to just sit around and talk about, well, you know." Talk about what? My 82 years of life, my memories, my marriage to his father. He couldn't even finish the sentence. My life was so uninteresting to him that he couldn't even find a polite euphemism for it. I expected my own son to toast me at my own birthday party, I said, a flicker of strength returning to my voice. I mentioned you, he shot back, his voice rising in irritation. This is exactly why we don't do things like this for you. You always find something to be unhappy about. You should have just been grateful that we went to all that effort. Aunt Margaret thought it was a wonderful affair. Aunt Margaret said, Aunt Margaret, I saw then that my son was a lost cause. He had been so thoroughly indoctrinated into the cult of his aunt's wealth and status that he was blind to everything else. He was incapable of seeing me as anything other than a relic of a past he was trying to transcend. I see, I said quietly. Well, thank you for clarifying. I hung up the phone before he could reply, and with that click, something shifted permanently inside me. The grief was still there, but it was now mingled with a cold, hard anger. It was the anger of the perpetually patient, the eternally understanding, finally reaching their limit. Frank's voice echoed in my mind from that long-ago engagement party. That's all that matters. But he was gone, and it turned out it wasn't all that mattered to the family he had left behind. I spent the next few weeks in a cocoon of reflection. I sifted through my memories not as a victim but as an analyst. The county fair tomato plant, my engagement party, the countless Christmases where Margaret's extravagant gifts outshone our thoughtful, modest ones and Robert's childhood eyes would light up for her, not for me. The time Frank was in the hospital for a minor surgery, and Robert, then a teenager, skipped visiting hours because Aunt Margaret had offered him tickets to a concert. Each memory was a small, sharp stone, and I was finally seeing the mountain of disrespect they had built over a lifetime. I had allowed it. I had been complicit in my own erasure by being the mature one, the one who didn't make a fuss. I had swallowed my pride so many times that I had forgotten what it tasted like. My mother's words from 70 years ago echoed in my mind. Let your sister have her moment. My whole life had been one long moment belonging to Margaret, and my son had eagerly continued the tradition. I realized I wasn't just grieving a ruined birthday party. I was grieving the loss of a family I had only ever pretended to have. The illusion was shattered, and in its place was a truth as stark and cold as a winter morning. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could not let this be the final chapter of my story. 2 weeks after the party, on a crisp Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. It was Chloe holding a small box from a local bakery. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes were full of a familiar worry. She had been calling every day, her voice a lifeline in my sea of silence. I brought scones, she said softly, your favorite, cranberry orange. You are a good girl, Chloe, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I ushered her into the kitchen and we sat at my small oaten table, the one where Frank and I had shared thousands of meals. The autumn sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in weeks, the light didn't feel intrusive. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Chloe put down her scone and looked at me, her expression serious. How are you, Grandma, really? I took a slow breath. I've been better, I admitted. I spoke with your father. Chloe winced. Let me guess, he told you that you were being sensitive. I gave a small, wry smile. Among other things, the gist of it was that I should be grateful for the humiliation. She shook her head, her anger a palpable force in the quiet kitchen. I can't believe him, or my stepmom, or Aunt Margaret. It's like they live in a different reality where common decency doesn't apply. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was warm and soft against my cool, wrinkled flesh. You know that what they did was wrong, don't you? Completely, utterly wrong. It was the validation I had been craving. To hear it stated so plainly without excuse or equivocation was like a soothing balm on a raw wound. "I know it now," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "For a long time, I think I just accepted it as the way things were. I was the quiet one, she was the loud one. I was the moon, she was the sun. It becomes a habit being in the shadows." "But you're not a shadow, Grandma," Chloe insisted, her grip tightening on my hand. "You're the one who was always there. You're the one who made Grandpa happy. You're the one who taught me how to paint a watercolor rose. You're the one who remembers every family story. Your life, it's not modest, it's rich. They're the ones who are poor because they're too blind to see it." Her words were like water on parched earth. She saw me. She saw the value in the life I had built, the life Robert had so casually dismissed. For years, I had believed that my worth was defined by my family's perception of me. Listening to Chloe, I began to entertain a radical new idea that my worth was inherent. It existed independently of their approval or disapproval. "Your grandfather always used to say that character is what you are in the dark," I mused, looking out at my garden. "I suppose I've spent a lot of my life in the dark, and I always tried to maintain my character. But what I'm realizing is that sometimes you have to be willing to step into the light and show people who you are, even if it makes them uncomfortable." A new feeling began to bubble up inside me, displacing the grief and the cold anger. It was resolve, a quiet, steely determination to reclaim my own narrative. I was not going to fade away as Beatrice Thorne, the dependable, sweet, and ultimately insignificant sister of the great Margaret Sterling. That was their story about me, not my own. "What are you thinking, Grandma?" Chloe asked, watching my face intently. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. "I'm thinking that I'm 82 years old. I have lived through a war, a depression, the invention of television, and men walking on the moon. I buried the love of my life with a dignity he deserved. I'm not going to let my story be hijacked by a woman in a turquoise caftan and a son who has mistaken his bank account for a personality." Chloe's eyes lit up. "What are we going to do?" she asked, the "we" sending a thrill of strength through me. I was not alone in this. "We are not going to be angry," I said, feeling my way through the idea as it formed. "Anger is their language, shouting, drama, confrontation, that's Margaret's stage. We are going to be calm, we are going to be dignified, and we are going to be honest." I stood up and walked over to the old secretary desk where Frank used to pay the bills. I opened a drawer and pulled out a piece of my good stationery, the thick, creamy paper I saved for important correspondence. "Your father seems to believe that this family's bedrock is Margaret's money," I said, my voice steady. "He has forgotten that a family is built on love and respect, not financial transactions, and he has certainly forgotten what I am capable of." "What are you going to do?" Chloe repeated, her voice a mixture of awe and excitement. I laid the paper on the desk and picked up my favorite fountain pen, the one Frank gave me. "I am going to call a family meeting," I said. "I have a few things to announce, about my will and about my future. It's time I took control of my own assets, both financial and emotional." Chloe came and stood beside me, a loyal soldier ready for battle. "They'll come," she said. "If they think it's about money, they'll be there in a heartbeat." "I know," I said, the pen feeling solid and powerful in my hand. "And that, my dear Chloe, is the whole point." The plan was taking shape not as an act of revenge, but as an act of profound and final self-respect. The following week was one of quiet, purposeful activity. With Chloe as my co-conspirator, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't experienced in years. We weren't plotting a vengeful outburst. We were choreographing a declaration of independence. It was meticulous, calm, and rooted in a truth that had been buried for far too long. My first step was a visit to my lawyer, Mr. Davison, a kind, elderly man who had taken over the practice from his father, who had been Frank's lawyer. I explained the situation to him not with the trembling emotion of a victim, but with the clear-eyed precision of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. He listened patiently, his fingertips steepled, his expression revealing nothing but professional empathy. "I want to amend my will," I stated clearly. "The house, which is paid for, and its contents are to be left entirely to my granddaughter, Chloe Thorne. My savings and what's left of Frank's pension, I want to divide it. Half to Chloe to help her start her life. The other half is to be split among 3 charities: the local public library, the community arts center where Chloe volunteers, and the hospice that took such wonderful care of my Frank." Mr. Davison raised an eyebrow. "And your son, Robert?" "Robert," I said, and my voice did not waver, "has made it clear that he is financially secure and that he values a different kind of legacy. I will leave him $1,000 so he cannot contest the will by claiming he was forgotten. He is not forgotten. He is being given exactly what he has earned from me, a token." Mr. Davison nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. "I understand completely, Beatrice. I'll have the papers drawn up." The next step was the call. I waited until a Wednesday evening when I knew Robert would be home from work. I dialed his number, Chloe sitting beside me, offering a reassuring squeeze of my hand. "Robert, it's your mother," I said, my tone level and formal. "Mom, is everything okay?" His voice was still tinged with that familiar irritation, as if my very existence were an inconvenience. "I am fine. I need to have a family meeting. I would like you, Susan, and Margaret to come to my house this Sunday at 2 o'clock. There are some important matters I need to discuss with you all." There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Important matters, family meeting. It could only mean one thing to him: money, my health, my end-of-life plans, his inheritance. "A meeting? What's this about?" he asked, a new note of cautious interest in his voice. "I will explain everything on Sunday," I replied calmly. "Please be prompt." I hung up before he could ask any more questions. As Chloe had predicted, he called back within the hour to confirm that he, Susan, and a very curious Aunt Margaret would be there. The days leading up to Sunday were not filled with anxiety, but with a strange sense of peace. I was no longer a ship being tossed on the waves of my family's whims. I was the lighthouse, fixed and steady, and they were the ones being called to my shore. Chloe helped me prepare. We didn't bake or plan an elaborate spread. We simply cleaned the house until it shone, a testament to a life of care and order. We put a vase of fresh chrysanthemums from my garden on the coffee table. I selected my chair, Frank's armchair, and placed it at the head of the living room. It was my home, my stage, my terms. On Sunday, precisely at 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Chloe answered it. I remained seated, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Robert, Susan, and Margaret swept in. Robert had an air of forced solemnity, the kind a man puts on when he expects to discuss a somber but profitable topic. Susan's eyes were already scanning my living room, no doubt appraising the value of my modest antiques. And Margaret looked bored, as if she were doing us all a great favor by gracing my humble home with her presence. She was dressed in tailored slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Beatrice," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you've called a summit. How dramatic. I hope this is important. I had to cancel my brunch plans." "Please have a seat," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I gestured to the sofa opposite my chair. They sat down, a formidable panel of judges, their body language radiating impatience. Chloe took a seat on a small ottoman near me, her presence a silent, solid support. A thick silence settled over the room. They were waiting for me to begin, expecting a quavering, elderly woman to talk about medical directives or funeral arrangements. I let the silence stretch just for a moment. I watched them, Robert fidgeting with his expensive watch, Susan smoothing her already perfect trousers, Margaret tapping an immaculate fingernail on her leather handbag. They were so consumed with the material whirl. So confident in their own importance. They had no idea they were not here to pass judgment, they were here to receive it. Finally, I cleared my throat. All three of them looked at me, their expressions sharp with anticipation. I looked at my son, I looked at his wife, I looked at my sister, and then I began to speak. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. "I have called you here because it has become apparent to me that there are some fundamental misunderstandings about this family, and I feel it is my duty as the eldest member to clarify them." Robert shifted on the couch, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. This was not the opening he had expected. Margaret simply raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "For my entire life," I continued, my gaze steady, "I have been taught that it is virtuous to be quiet, to be accommodating, to not make a fuss. I have lived by that principle. I have ceded the spotlight, I have swallowed my hurt, and I have always put the comfort of this family before my own feelings. I see now that this was a mistake. Not because the principle is wrong, but because you three have mistaken my quietness for weakness, my accommodation for worthlessness, and my lack of fuss for a lack of feeling." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Susan's polite smile was frozen on her face. "I am speaking, of course, about my 82nd birthday party." Robert let out an exasperated sigh. "Mom, are we really back to this? I told you you were being too sensitive." "I am not finished, Robert," I said, my voice cutting through his with a steel he had never heard from me before. He fell silent, his mouth slightly agape. "That party was not an oversight. It was the culmination of a lifetime of disrespect, made all the more painful because it was orchestrated by my own son. You used my milestone, a day meant to honor my life, as nothing more than a platform to worship at the altar of your aunt's money and status. You stood up in a room full of people and gave a toast in which you described my life, the life I built with your father, as a footnote. A modest, sad little prelude to the grand opera of Margaret's success. You called her the matriarch, you called her the bedrock, you erased me, Robert. In my own home, metaphorically speaking, you declared me irrelevant." I turned my gaze to my sister. "And you, Margaret, you let him? You stood there, soaking in the applause, accepting the title of matriarch of a family whose children you did not raise, whose fevers you did not soothe, whose struggles you never shared. You have always been happy to take the glory, but never the work. From the time you put your name on my tomato plant at the county fair, you have built your glittering life on a foundation of my quiet, thankless efforts." Margaret's face for the first time lost its bored composure. A flush of angry color rose in her cheeks. "Now see here, Beatrice." "No, you will see here," I said, my voice remaining level, which seemed to infuriate her more than shouting would have. "For 80 years I have let you have your moments. I am done. My moments are my own now." Finally, I looked at Susan. "And you, Susan, you are a wife and a mother. You, of all people, should understand the value of a woman's contribution to a home. But you have consistently and eagerly aided your husband in devaluing his own mother. You have encouraged his worship of wealth because you, too, are a devoted parishioner. You are complicit in every slight, every moment of neglect." The silence that followed was thick with shock. They stared at me as if I were a stranger. In a way, I was the Beatrice they knew would never have spoken these words. So, I have made some decisions, I announced into the stunned silence. Since Robert has declared Margaret the bedrock of this family's success, and since he is so clearly secure, I have decided to restructure my legacy to reflect my own values. This got their full attention. Robert leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. I have met with my lawyer and amended my will. This house, my savings, my personal effects, my entire estate will be left to the people and institutions that have brought me genuine joy and shown me true respect. The bulk of it will go to Chloe. I glanced at my granddaughter, whose eyes were shining with tears, not of sorrow, but of pride. The rest will go to the library, the arts center, and the hospice that cared for my Frank. Robert, I have left you $1,000, a token to remember me by. Robert's face went white, then a blotchy, furious red. You can't do that, that's my inheritance, that's Dad's money. It is my money, I stated calmly. And it is my legacy. You made your choice, Robert. You chose Margaret's values. Now you can live with them. I am sure your wealthy matriarch will see to your needs. Susan looked as if she might faint. Margaret was sputtering for once in her life, rendered almost speechless. This is spiteful, Beatrice, after all I've done for this family. What have you done, Margaret? I asked, a genuine question. You have offered financial support, yes, but that was never a gift. It was an investment in your own power, a way to ensure their loyalty belonged to you. You didn't give, you purchased. I stood up then, my old bones feeling stronger and lighter than they had in years. This meeting is over, but my announcement is not just about my will, it is about my life. As of today, I am emotionally divesting from the three of you. My time, my energy, my love, these are precious resources, and I will no longer waste them on people who do not value them. My door will always be open to Chloe. For the rest of you, I suggest you enjoy the life you have built. I wish you no ill will. I simply wish to have nothing more to do with it. With that, I turned to Chloe. Chloe, dear, would you mind helping me with the tea? I suddenly feel like celebrating. Leaving the three of them sitting on my sofa in stunned, apoplectic silence, Chloe and I walked into my kitchen. She closed the door behind us and we leaned against it, listening to the furious, sputtering whispers that erupted in the living room. A few moments later, we heard the front door slam shut. I looked at Chloe and a laugh escaped my lips. It was a real, deep, joyful laugh. The sound of a cage door swinging open. I was free. My life was no longer a footnote. It was the whole story, and it was finally mine to write. For a long time, I believed that my value was something that had to be given to me by others. I waited for my family to see me, to acknowledge me, to tell me that my quiet life had meaning. The truth I've learned at the ripe old age of 82 is that you can't wait for anyone to hand you your worth. You have to claim it for yourself. My triumph wasn't in changing my will. It was in changing my own mind about who I was. I am not the sister of or the mother of. I am Beatrice Thorne. And that is more than enough.